2020 with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters.
Tonight, a Tennessee sheriff's wave of crime. It was marked by greed, violence, and contempt for the law itself.
It wasn't just the story of one man gone berserk, but it was a system that tolerated it.
Elected officials believed in the sheriff, but his wife knew he was guilty. How did the prosecutor nab him? Geraldo Rivera tells the story of a lawman turned outlaw. Dyer County Blues.
And with the Geneva summit at hand, what really happens when an American president meets a Soviet premier? Former Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter know firsthand. They know the tension.
The first thing we did was to have a private meeting.
They know the challenge.
A real major test.
They know what's at stake.
We can't afford to be enemies.
With Reagan and Gorbachev about to meet, our former presidents relive for ABC News their critical hours at the summit.
And why are folks storming planet Botan? It's the hottest new game for teens and adults, where in a Star Wars setting, contestants do battle with their wits and ray guns. Consumer correspondent John Stossel reports from the dimly lit surface of planet Botan. What on earth is it? And what makes it hot?
Even if we didn't need police officers or sheriffs, Hollywood producers would have invented them, because audiences just can't get enough of the rat-a-tat-tat action and the colorful characters that TV cop shows are made of. Sometimes the storylines involve a cop who goes astray of the law. Now, such a story might be entertaining to watch, but there's a catch.
What if that kind of thing was going on where you live? What if not only your local sheriffs, but their deputies as well, turn out to be some of the most dangerous criminals around? Now, that may sound like TV, but as Geraldo Rivera found out, that is exactly what was happening in Dyer County, Tennessee.
Tennessee is easily one of the country's most colorful states, known around the world for its music, its stately walking horses, its widespread fields of cotton, its smooth bourbon whiskey, and its lawmen. Tennessee's sheriffs are a special breed. They're often the most powerful political figure in the whole county, and a potent force for good, or in some cases, for evil. Most famous of the many heroes was Buford Pusser, he who carried a big stick, and who walked tall against the crooks, and whose life was featured in 3 different movies. But our report is not about the heroes. As a matter of fact, you could call it Walking Small. This is Dyer County in western Tennessee. It's the home of Sheriff Tommy Cribbs, evidently one of the meanest, drunkest, wildest sheriffs ever to catch the national eye.
He's capable of putting a gun upside your head and threatening to kill you.
He had told him, he said, I can kill you and leave you out here and nobody will ever find you.
Tommy needed to be constantly reminded that he had merely been elected sheriff. He hadn't been crowned king.
It wasn't just the story of one man gone berserk, but it was a system that tolerated it.
Tolerated it for years. It actually started with Tommy's daddy, John Cribbs, a cigar-chomping lawman of the old school. Maybe you can catch the resemblance to the fictional character Boss Hogg from the Dukes of Hazzard television show. Daddy John was first elected sheriff back in 1962. He once ran on the platform that it takes a crook to catch a crook. He later made Tommy one of his deputies. Tommy became top dog after his daddy retired in '76. Well, the dynasty finally ended in August when Cribbs was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison after confessing to torturing prisoners, stealing county money, intimidating federal witnesses, defrauding insurance companies, illegally distributing automatic weapons, and stealing sheep in Missouri.
He and his father before him were very powerful, and nobody crossed them. And so once they realized that the government was serious and in fact could carry through and convict him and put him in jail, then people started coming out of the woodwork.
This man, Robert Call, a former Cribs deputy, was one of those who came out of the woodwork.
I was there when the heads were busted. I was there when the buildings were burnt. I was there when we done it all.
State and federal agents knew that Deputy Call was plotting with an accomplice to burn down several buildings for money. But Deputy Call didn't know that his accomplice, a convicted bank robber named Davis, was working as a government informant and carried a tape recorder. The deputy and the con had been promised $1,000 to torch this nightclub. On the tape, they're complaining about not getting paid all their money. Remember, Call is a deputy sheriff.
You know, we never did get all our money.
Hell yeah, no we didn't.
But he told me that he gave you $300.
He gave me $400 one time, and then he paid off my damn Toyota fund.
Yeah.
So there's $300. So that puts him owing you $300.
Confronted with the recorded evidence against him, Deputy Cole decided to help the feds take down the big boss himself, Sheriff Tommy Cribs, and the gang of criminals around him. One Cribs crony, a local gambler, had asked the sheriff's henchman to assassinate Jim Horner. That's the county's attorney general. He was targeted because against the sheriff's wishes, he'd been raiding gambling halls the sheriff had already taken payoffs to protect.
Do you think the sheriff and his group had gone so far in their arrogance that they thought they could even kill the attorney general and get away with it?
I think they got to the point where they were planning on it, so apparently they'd gotten to the point where they thought they could get rid of me like that.
So you had a closely knit group of people who thought they were above the law.
They thought they could do anything they wanted to do in Dyer County. And it, you know, you could say that they were doing just about anything they wanted to till all this came to a head and they were caught up with.
From the safety of his new life as a protected witness with a new identity, ex-Deputy Call has written a song about the life and times of his former boss.
A grand jury met in Memphis, lots of people came down. They all told stories of how the sheriff ran the town. When the questions were over, the answers were done. Several special agents took away the sheriff's big gun.
Just before federal agents finally did catch up with Sheriff Cribs, he told local newsman Doug Dyer his opinion of the case against him.
Well, through the years, you know, we've had a lot of murders and kidnappers, and naturally they're not treated like school children or helping some old lady go to church. But the federal government indicts me for violating civil rights of murderers and rapists and robbers. Well, then they'll just have to have at it.
And have at him they did. This is U.S. Attorney Hickman Ewing.
An example where he and Robert Call had these two murderers. They got drunk one night, and they got their wives, and they went down to the jail, and they said, we'll show you how we get confessions out of people. The wives sat in the closet, and they were the jury to decide which one of these guys had actually done the murder.
I brought the first inmate in cuffs, set him down, and Sheriff Cribs had a nickel-plated 12-gauge pump shotgun. After, you know, several punches with the gun, and he kept telling me he's going to kill him if he didn't tell the truth. The guy told his side of the story, so I took him back to maximum security, and I brought the other inmate in. After a few jabs to the groin area, a few jabs to the ribs, busted him on the head a couple of times with a shotgun. He told me to take the cuffs off of him and he was going to kill the guy. He had a side door leading out of his office. He throwed me the keys, said, open the side door, throw him out in the parking lot, I'm going to kill him. I opened the door, I threw the guy out, and he fired. I thought he'd killed him. He'd fired over the guy's head.
And then we had a carnival worker that they took out because the carnival worker had gotten into a scuffle with the sheriff's son.
The sheriff pulled over and told the guy to get out. And as I was getting out of the car coming around, he fired the .30 caliber carbine up next to his temple. The percussion from the weapon knocked the guy to his knees. The guy said, well, I hadn't done anything. And the sheriff told him, well, I'll put you in jail for possession of marijuana. And he said, I don't have any marijuana. And he said, you'll have it on you before we get to jail.
There was another civil rights incident where a man had escaped, and Tommy was not happy with him. So when they had him in, he was being interviewed by one of the deputies, and Tommy comes in and just hauls off and knocks him out of the chair. The guy later escapes again. When he comes back, Tommy said, "You're not going to do that to me again." Opens the door, says, "You take off running. If I miss you 6 times, you can go free."
Among other charges Cribbs ultimately pled guilty to was intimidating 5 federal witnesses against him. One of those was his department's chief investigator, Joe McDowell. McDowell told us the big bad sheriff once walked into his office with an open, straight razor.
He never actually said, "I'll cut you," or that, but I was intimidated by the flicking of the razor close to me because of the questions and the statements that he was making.
What do you think his intention was?
To make me cautious about anything that I might say or to control my testimony.
On the day he was sentenced, Cribbs blamed his troubles on job pressure.
Well, there's a lot of stress, pressure, tension involved with the office. You're exposed to a lot of things.
He never realized that he did anything wrong because he couldn't do wrong.
According to his ex-wife, who's writing a book about her experiences, the sheriff's mean streak wasn't restricted to the potential witnesses against him. Cribbs was simply out of control, once using his riot shotgun, for example, to blast the fly off the ceiling of their bedroom. In what has to be one of their drunkest and most bizarre criminal schemes, Sheriff Cribbs and Deputy Call actually plotted to steal one of Tennessee's grandest traditions, the ducks who swim in the ornate fountain of the Peabody Hotel lobby in Memphis. In ceremonies complete with their own theme music, for half a century, the parade of the ducks has attracted tens of thousands of tourists. Well, Deputy Call told us the sheriff's motive was, quote, pure meanness.
Tommy Cribbs was an avid hunter who would often supplement his prisoner's diet with what he called the catch of the day, venison, fish, or fowl. But according to his ex-wife, he apparently thought the conservation laws did not apply to him.
He was of the opinion that if there were ducks in the air, they should all be killed. If there was a deer in the field, it should go on the grill or in the freezer. He didn't know moderation in that respect, and it carried throughout the rest of his life, his lifestyle.
This well-stocked duck pond is maintained by the Tennessee State Highway Patrol as a kind of public service. Well, one night, Sheriff Cribbs and a friend came here drunk, and they shot and killed every duck within range. This man was a despoiler, a fellow who, for example, would use dynamite to kill fish or fowl. A man who, if he couldn't bag a deer, would just as soon go out and kill somebody's sheep. It was a nasty habit, and it ultimately helped hasten his downfall. This Missouri sheep pasture was violated by Sheriff Cribbs in June of '84. Drunk and frustrated by his inability to find real game, Tommy killed one sheep and wounded another. The basic problem, from the sheriff's point of view at least, was that the sheep are owned by a Missouri judge, David Hudspeth, and he didn't think it was funny. After hearing gunfire, the judge saw the Tennessee sheep hunters fleeing. Missouri lawmen were dispatched, and they caught up with the sheriff in this motel. Cribbs was in the act of butchering the sheep and later testified he was planning on making stew. Nobody laughed, and the sheriff was charged with a felony. By the time Sheriff Cribbs went on trial for shooting the judge's sheep, he had already been involved in a drunk driving accident, a possible cover-up, and other even more serious controversies. Still, at his trial, he received impressive support from the leadership of this community. The local newspaper, however, was outraged. If there is a hero in this sorry story, it's the editor, Earl Thornton, a consistent critic of the sheriff's reign of terror. Editor Thornton exposed the real reason Cribbs had managed to stay in power for so long. From the files of the Missouri criminal action, Thornton obtained all the letters the court had received, asking leniency on Sheriff Cribbs' behalf. The names on the letters read like a roll call of the power elite in this part of the state.
It is remarkable to me, some of the people named. I mean, this is a congressman?
Congressman Jones, yes. All the county courthouse officials, practically. Circuit court clerk, county court clerk, Judge Hammett, the police chief.
Didn't they know what was going on?
Certainly they did. They may say they didn't. People said that, you know, he was effective. Well, if you're an effective sheriff, do you have one of your inmates and one of your deputies stealing away during the night to set fires, and that's exactly what happened. Do you give a convicted felon who is your best friend the run of the jail when he's supposed to be serving time down there? And do you, does a good law enforcement officer tell his deputies, leave my friend alone, he can do anything he wants to? That's not good law enforcement.
One of the letter writers, Tom Jones, the clerk of the court, had gone so far as to claim the sheriff was a good Christian with an unblemished reputation.
How can you say that Tommy Cribbs has an unblemished reputation? How can you tell that to a court when you knew for a fact that that was not the case?
Well, I didn't know that for a fact at that time.
You didn't know that? You didn't know that he was a drunk, a carouser, or a person who broke every fish and game law on the books, a person involved in all different kinds of controversies here?
I knew none of that for a fact, for a personal fact, no, sir. I think he had been a good citizen.
A good Christian.
In my opinion, he had Christian ideals.
And now in retrospect?
Maybe I was wrong.
One of the local police chiefs said he was right to write on the sheriff's behalf.
If you knew it was going to be published, Chief, would you still have written this letter?
Yes,
if you
sir.
knew it was going to be in the newspapers?
Yes, sir.
And yet you admit that it caused you embarrassment?
It caused me embarrassment, the fact that he finally pled guilty to it, and which made it true.
Do you have any comment at all to make about the investigation?
Another firm supporter of the sheriff, Dyer County Judge William Hammett, refused to tell local reporters why he appeared as a character witness on Sheriff Cribbs' behalf. While Congressman Ed Jones said he just didn't know Cribbs was under investigation when he wrote his nice letter for the sheriff.
So many people in Dyer County wanted favors. They wanted things done. They didn't want certain things to happen. They, too, didn't want to suffer the consequences for their acts that they should have.
Sentenced to 5 years in prison, Cribbs should be eligible for parole in about 3. What's amazing and depressing about his legacy is the number of people who fear the day that Sheriff Cribbs comes back to town.
I was scared of him, you know. I'm still scared of him. He's in jail right now.
Tommy Cribbs is dangerous. He is a dangerous man.
He told me one time, I hold a grudge, I don't forget, and I don't forgive.
Well then, Geraldo, what happens when the sheriff gets out in 5 years? That's not a very long time.
I was thinking that the most ironic thing that could possibly happen is that Tommy Cribbs run for re-election and be re-elected, because there's no law, as far as I understand the laws of the state of Tennessee, that would prohibit him from running for re-election. There is a law, however, that prohibits convicted felons from carrying a gun. So he would have Tommy Cribbs sheriff again, but with an empty holster.
Well, a deputy could carry a gun if that was...
I hope that people have more sense than that.
But it brings up the whole question, or perhaps the moral of this story. How could something like this happen? Where were the people? Where were the citizens?
Well, they had many of the people in power, I'm not only talking about politicians, but also business people with power, had their own programs. And if Tommy didn't do anything bad to them, or if Tommy did something that he wanted, that the business person or the politician wanted them to, then, you know, it's in their self-interest to keep